200 miles. That's how far a pit bull named Duke walked to find a 12-year-old boy named Tommy. Everyone said it was impossible, that dogs don't navigate like that loyalty has limits. But when I tell you what happened the night they first met, you'll understand why Duke never stopped believing he'd find his way back to the boy who saw something in him that no one else did. Duke wasn't always a fighter. Before the scars, before the mistrust in his amber eyes, he was just a puppy who loved too freely in a world that punished gentleness. By the time he was 3, those soft brown eyes had hardened. The rescue shelter labeled him aggressive, code for unwanted, code for running out of time. He'd been returned 4 times, 4 families who couldn't see past his blocky head and muscular frame. Duke learned to expect rejection, learned to keep his tail tucked and his hope buried deep. He'd sit in the corner of his kennel, watching smaller, fluffier dogs get chosen while potential families walked past his cage without a second glance. But Duke still dreamed. In his sleep, he'd whimper softly, his paws twitching as he ran through fields where no one flinched when he approached, where gentle hands scratched behind his ears and whispered, "Good boy." He dreamed of belonging somewhere, of being someone's first choice instead of their last resort. The day Tommy Martinez walked into that shelter, Duke was scheduled for his final evaluation. One more failed assessment, and his story would end there. The 12-year-old boy had begged his parents for months to let him volunteer at the animal shelter. He was small for his age, quiet, the kind of kid who understood what it felt like to be overlooked. Tommy's first day at the shelter was Duke's last chance. The boy was cleaning kennels when he heard the intake coordinator talking to the veterinarian. "The pit bull in Kennel 7, she said, her voice carrying that tone adults use when they think kids aren't listening. "He growled at the family yesterday. That's it for him." Tommy had already noticed Kennel 7. While other dogs barked and jumped for attention, Duke sat perfectly still, watching. When their eyes met, Tommy saw something the adults had missed. Not aggression, but exhaustion. The kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes from hoping too hard for too long. Against shelter rules, Tommy slipped Duke a piece of his sandwich through the kennel bars. Duke approached slowly, carefully, his massive head lowered in submission. He took the food gently, his tongue barely grazing Tommy's fingers. For a moment, neither moved. Boy and dog, both unwanted in their own ways, recognizing something familiar in each other. "He's not mean," Tommy whispered to Duke. "You're just scared, aren't you?" The next morning, Tommy arrived early, before his volunteer shift officially started. Duke was already waiting by the front of his kennel, tail giving the smallest, most hopeful wag. Tommy read to him from his school books, sharing stories about kids who found where they belonged, about friendship that conquered fear. Day after day, Tommy visited. He brought Duke his lunch, taught him commands with patience no adult had ever shown. Under Tommy's gentle persistence, Duke began to remember what trust felt like. His tail wagged more freely, his eyes softened. The shelter staff started to notice. But bureaucracy moves slowly, and hope runs out fast. Tommy's family received news that would change everything. His father's job was transferring them across the country. They had 2 weeks to pack up their entire life and move to Oregon. 2 weeks to say goodbye to everything familiar, including a pit bull who had just learned how to hope again. Tommy spent his last day at the shelter in Duke's kennel, both of them knowing this was goodbye. He pressed his face against Duke's neck, breathing in his warm, familiar scent. Duke seemed to understand, pressing close, as if he could memorize the boy's heartbeat. "I'm sorry," Tommy whispered, his voice breaking. "I wanted to take you with me. I tried to convince Mom and Dad, but the new apartment doesn't allow big dogs, and the drive is too long," and the excuses fell away into silence. They both knew the truth. Sometimes love isn't enough to overcome circumstances. Tommy left his favorite sweatshirt in Duke's kennel, the blue one that smelled like home and friendship, and promises that couldn't be kept. 3 days after Tommy left, Duke stopped eating. He lay on Tommy's sweatshirt, nose buried in the fading scent, eyes fixed on the kennel door. The shelter staff tried everything, different foods, new volunteers, longer walks. Nothing worked. Duke was dying of a broken heart, and everyone could see it. On day 5, during the morning volunteer shift, Duke's kennel stood empty. The back gate, which had a faulty latch the maintenance crew kept meaning to fix, hung open. Security cameras showed Duke squeezing through the gap at dawn, looking back once at the shelter before disappearing into the morning mist. The search lasted 3 days. Volunteers scoured the local area, posted flyers, checked every park and playground. But Duke was gone, vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. What they didn't know was that Duke had begun the most incredible journey of his life. Driven by something deeper than instinct, stronger than logic, he started walking west. He had no map, no GPS, just the pull of love and the memory of a 12-year-old boy who had seen his worth. 200 miles of highways and back roads, forests and farmland, cities and suburbs. Duke walked through rainstorms that soaked him to the bone and heat waves that left him panting in whatever shade he could find. He scavenged for food, drank from puddles and streams, slept in abandoned buildings and under highway overpasses. His paws cracked and bled. His weight dropped from 65 pounds to 43. Concerned strangers tried to catch him, but Duke evaded every attempt. He had somewhere to be, someone to find. Nothing else mattered. Animal control officers in 3 different counties received reports of a stray pit bull moving steadily west. But Duke wasn't stray. He was determined. Every mile brought him closer to the boy who had taught him that love was possible, that he was worthy of gentleness. On day 18 of his journey, Duke limped into the suburb where Tommy's family had moved. His legs trembled with exhaustion, his ribs showed through his dull coat, but his nose caught a familiar scent on the wind, not just Tommy's scent, but home. Tommy was shooting baskets in his driveway when he heard the neighbor's dog barking frantically. He turned toward the commotion and froze. A skeletal pit bull stood at the end of his driveway, swaying on his feet, amber eyes locked on Tommy's face. "Duke," Tommy whispered, his basketball forgotten on the asphalt. At the sound of his name, Duke's tail began to wag. Not the cautious wag of the shelter, but the full-body joy of a dog who had found his purpose. He took 3 shaky steps forward and collapsed at Tommy's feet, pressing his muzzle against the boy's hands. Tommy dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You found me," he sobbed into Duke's matted fur. "You actually found me." The veterinarian said it was a miracle Duke survived the journey. Dehydrated, malnourished, his paws raw from 200 miles of pavement, but his heart was strong, his spirit unbreakable. Tommy's parents, who had initially resisted getting a dog, took one look at Duke's incredible journey and knew this wasn't just any dog. This was family. They found a new apartment that allowed pets. They converted their savings for new furniture into veterinary bills and high-quality dog food. Duke's recovery took months. Tommy never left his side, reading to him like he had at the shelter, hand-feeding him when he was too weak to lift his head to his bowl. Slowly, Duke's weight returned. His coat regained its shine. His trust in the world, shattered by years of abandonment, began to rebuild around the foundation of one boy's unconditional love. The local news picked up their story. Miracle Dog walks 200 miles to find boy, made headlines across 3 states. But Tommy and Duke barely noticed the attention. They were too busy making up for lost time. Long walks in their new neighborhood, lazy afternoons in the backyard, nights when Duke slept curled at the foot of Tommy's bed. Finally safe, finally home. The shelter that had nearly given up on Duke started a new program. Extended care for difficult animals, more time for training, more patience for trust to develop. Duke's story reminded everyone that sometimes the dogs who need the most love are the ones who have the most love to give. Tommy often tells people that he didn't save Duke. Duke saved him. Moving to a new state, starting at a new school, leaving everything familiar behind, it could have been the loneliest time of his life. Instead, it became the beginning of the most incredible friendship he'd ever known. Duke never forgot the journey that brought him home. Sometimes on their evening walks, he'll stop and look west, his nose lifted to catch scents on the wind. Not with longing, those days of searching are over, but with the quiet pride of a dog who knew his own worth and refused to settle for less. The blue sweatshirt Tommy left at the shelter still hangs in Duke's corner of the bedroom, faded now but treasured. It's a reminder that love doesn't always lead us on easy paths. Sometimes it asks us to walk 200 miles through uncertainty, sustained only by faith and the memory of gentle hands. Duke's story spread far beyond their small Oregon town. It reached families considering adopting pit bulls, showing them that behind the intimidating exterior often beats the heart of a dog capable of extraordinary loyalty. It reached shelter workers who needed reminding that every animal has a story worth fighting for. Most importantly, it reached other kids like Tommy, quiet ones, overlooked ones, kids who understand that the best friendships sometimes begin with seeing potential where others see problems. Today, when Tommy scratches behind Duke's ears and whispers, "Good boy," Duke's tail still wags with the same full-body joy as that day in the driveway. Because he is good. He always was. It just took a 12-year-old boy to help him remember, and a 200-mile journey to prove that some bonds are unbreakable. In a world that often judges by appearances, Duke and Tommy's story reminds us that love recognizes love, that loyalty has no limits, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when we refuse to give up on each other. If this story touched your heart, remember, there's a Duke waiting in shelters everywhere, hoping for someone to see past the surface to the love underneath. And maybe, just maybe, they'll walk to the ends of the earth to find their way back to you.